Oh, and Alex and Val and Lindsay and Ben, afterwards we'll ask if you're comfortable with sharing the recording and or slides. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Hi, everyone. People are joining the call. And we'll give people a couple minutes to join in, and then we'll get started. Summers tend to have slightly lower turnout for webinars, but like I was saying, I was amazed when I saw how many people watch the video recordings of our webinars. Yeah, it's great. But I like to think that some people might escape outside and watch a webinar during a summer afternoon. And yeah. Okay, let's get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca Penn, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am located in what is colonially known as Sogum-Kigum in Mi'kmaq, in Mi'kmaqi, what's now known as Nova Scotia. I'm the project manager for the Substance Use Health Network, and I'm going to be your host for this webinar today. I want us to start off with an acknowledgement of the land that we're all on. We are gathered today on a virtual platform. Most of us are here from Turtle Island, and I would like for us to start with acknowledging the land on which we're all situated. As I say, I'm on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And those of you who are joining us from across Turtle Island, please feel free to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of the lands that you're joining us from today. And you might want to put in the chat the name of the lands that you're on. I think it's really important that when we're doing these land acknowledgements, that we also think about the connection that the work that we're doing has with the let's say project, or the imperative of decolonization. So I want to acknowledge that that many of us that are here are people who are working in the social or health sectors. And our work is really about addressing social and structural harms that are rooted in colonialism and racism. Our institutions, our ways of thinking, our practices are all really embedded in those historical but also ongoing processes. And so I like to make sure that we do take a moment to think about our commitment to that work of decolonization and addressing the roots of these harms. We know that Indigenous people, as well as members of the African, Caribbean, and Black communities, are disproportionately impacted by drug policies that are rooted in racism and colonialism. And so colonialism is with us today. It's not a thing of the past. And so, yes, let's reflect on how we can work to transform racist and colonial practices and institutions, and really work to repair those harms and prevent future harms. Quickly, some housekeeping. We are recording this event, and we are planning to share it on our website afterwards. We can let you know when we do that. We do have English closed captioning enabled. You can find that on the bottom of your screen. We're going to have a presentation, and it will also involve some discussion. There's the chat box where you can communicate with everybody who's in attendance here today, and there's also the Q&A box. If you have questions or comments specifically for the panel, please put them in the Q&A box so that we can keep track of them, because sometimes things get lost in the chat box. We do have a poll that we're going to ask you to complete. It's a really quick poll that we use for stats, and that helps us with applying for funding and things like that. It also helps us make sure that that the webinars and sessions that we hold are useful for you. So please do complete that. For those of you who are not familiar with the Substance Use Health Network, really quick intro to who we are. So we are formerly the National Safer Supply Community of Practice. Over the course of the past year, we have evolved to be the Substance Use Health Network. And part of that is broadening our focus from safer supply to substance use health more generally, recognizing safer supply is one tool in the toolbox, and the importance of having conversations about the wider continuum of care for substance use health and the social determinants of substance use health. So we have an interdisciplinary membership of about 2,000 people from across Canada and beyond Canada, actually, Australia, the States, Europe. So yeah, and a pretty amazing group of folks. And our focus is on knowledge exchange and capacity building, and very importantly, also building community. If you're not already a member of the community of the Substance Use Health Network, please do join us and visit our website for lots of resources there. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And I'm really happy to have this team with us today, or members of the Tracking Injustice team. I was saying to them just before we started the webinar how grateful I am for them coming, because like I say, part of our goal is to broaden the conversations that we have within the Substance Use Health Network, talking about incarceration, talking about continuity of care, and how all of these social forces are working or not working, and impacting people's well-being. So big thanks to have Lindsay and Val and Vanessa and Alex here today. I also want to thank Katie Upham, who's here helping with the chat and just with the technical pieces here, help supporting me. And also a shout out to the Reclaim Collective, who've been really helpful with the work of the Substance Use Health Network, including help supporting, promoting our events and things like that. So yay, thanks Reclaim. So thanks. With that, enough of me. I turn it over to Alex and Lindsay and Val and Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thanks, Katie. And thank you everyone for joining today on this August afternoon. We're going to just do a quick round of introductions, and then I'll give you an overview of our plan for the discussion today. We want to be really interactive, so please make use of the chat, ask us lots of questions. Our project is in process and ongoing, and so we also appreciate feedback. We are a big database of kind of information that we want to make accessible to people, so also are interested in ways that we could make this our work accessible and usable to you. So feel free to engage with us in conversation throughout today. But before we get into things, first, let's just do some introductions. So I'm Alex McClelland. I'm coming to you from Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, and I am a professor of criminology at the Institute of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Carleton University, and I've been working on the Tracking Injustice project since it started in 2021. I'll hand it over to Lindsay to do an introduction, and then we can get the slides up after that, so everyone goes around.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Alex. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Jennings. I am the lead research associate with Tracking Injustice Project with Carleton. Let me backtrack. I'm coming to you from Mississauga, Ontario, which is Treaty 13. And I also work at McMaster University, where I facilitate a prison health research council. And I am someone of lived experience of being incarcerated, drug use, homelessness, and the list goes on with those things. And this work is just really, really dear to my heart. I've been an advocate for a while around deaths in custody. So it's just an honor to be here. Vanessa? I know mute on a phone is terrible. I'm going to ask you to unmute. I don't know if it works.
And I somehow changed my background. Hi, I'm Vanessa. I am a person with lived experience as well, and I'm also a spoken word poet, and I've been recently working with tracking injustice, and I am at my kids' swimming lessons, so if you see me constantly looking to the side, it's because I'm waiting for them to come out.
And Val, do you want to go?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Valeria Danieli. I'm also a research associate with the project. I've been on for, I'm not sure, probably a little over a year and a half or so. Yeah, I'm also a student at Osgood Law School and just working through that. Nice to be here.
So maybe we're gonna all kind of collaboratively present together aspects of our research today. And Lindsay, if you wouldn't mind putting up the slides, I can go over what we're gonna talk about.
Yeah, just bear with me. Sharing slides and experience.
And so we're aware that this is a topic that this network hasn't talked about specifically, and that kind of we're broadening the scope. And we've envisioned this, not to be presumptive, but we've envisioned this as a two-part webinar. So our next webinar, hopefully in the not too distant future, will focus more specifically on some analysis related to substance use in the data that we're collecting around deaths in custody. Today, we're going to do kind of a bigger picture analysis of our overall project, how we do what we do, some trends we're seeing, and some of the kind of issues we want to bring forward. And we'll then do a deeper dive, specifically looking at issues related to substances next time we have a conversation. So if you have any questions related to that, we'll do our best, but our project, again, is ongoing, and we are continuing analysis on an ongoing basis. So if you could switch to the next slide, Lindsay. Or can I do it? Okay, awesome. So this is an overview of what we plan on doing today. If you have any specific questions off the bat about deaths in custody that you want to get answered during this webinar, please just pose them to us in the chat, and we'll try and address them. We want to make sure that we get your kind of questions answered during this conversation. And we know lots about this issue that we're not going to be able to dive into today. So if there's anything really specific that you want to know, let us know and we'll figure out how to answer it. We also want to address that what we're going to be talking about today is some very challenging stuff. We're talking specifically about sometimes the horrific context in which people die in custody in different custodial settings due to a range of different issues, including violence and neglect. And some of the stuff we're going to talk about is challenging to hear and challenging to talk about. And so we want to make sure that you all take a breath, take the space that you need, walk around, take a moment up to pause. Afterwards, take care of yourself, go outside, experience the sunshine, do things that are good for yourself for the rest of the day. But just take the time you need and just kind of just setting an understanding for everyone that what we're going to talk about is challenging today. I'm going to hand it over before we get going and diving into our project to Vanessa, who's going to set us off with one of her awesome poems.
Okay. So I wrote this poem when I was at the Ottawa Carleton Detention Center. I was trying to give a visualization of what it's like to be incarcerated there. And I tried to incorporate the crimes, so-called crimes, that most people were there for. I broke the law, so the law broke my spirit. I still have a voice somewhere, but now no one can hear it. I once had sanity, but now I'm nowhere near it. I stole something, so the law stole my soul. They expect me to lay down silently and do what I'm told while I'm boxed in concrete, so lonely and cold. I unlawfully entered a dwelling, so the law unlawfully entered my brain. They took all my clothing so that we could all look the same. They took my distinguishing characteristics so that I'm just a number and a last name. They took my values and my privacy so that I have no shame. And this humiliation is the rehabilitation they claim, so they could build more super jails like franchise food chains. I assaulted someone, so the law assaulted my pride. My skin color requires no jury. I've already been tried. And if there was an electric chair, I'd be strapped down and fried. But instead, I'm left to serve extended sentences inside, so long that I forget what laws I failed to abide. And like a zombie, my body keeps going through the motions long after my brain has died. I obstructed justice, so the law has made my path obstructed. I lost all hope since my livelihood and confidence were abducted. Now there's nothing left to do except to do what is instructed. I robbed, so the law robbed me of my optimism. Now I have no rights, cannot make my own basic decisions. Like an animal, neglected and left to rot in these dirty prisons. They wanted to guarantee my likelihood of recidivism. I trafficked drugs, so the law trafficked me into slavery to rid me of my happiness, independence, and bravery with no consideration for the circumstances that brought me here because the law doesn't favor me. I uttered false documents, so the law uttered me false lines about being innocent till proven guilty and about how justice is blind. I admitted I had a problem and help is what I expected to find, but instead I lose my freedom, lose my faith, and lose my mind. I was in the possession of illegal goods, so the law has put me in their possession, treating me horribly, bringing me deep into depression, taking away my very existence was supposed to teach me a lesson. I caused a disturbance, so the law has made me mentally disturbed. I'm no longer a person. I have no identity. My past has been blurred. I'm reduced to nothing, then kicked to the curb, expected to function in society after the inhumane treatment I've endured. I committed a crime, so the law committed me to segregation so that I could know the true meaning of helplessness and frustration, and I could experience every possible human rights violation. Their intentions were to destroy my mind and destroy my motivation until both my physical and mental health were in the state of deterioration. I breached the conditions of my probation because the law breached my trust. They lied when they said they were here to serve and protect us. Their only goal was to fill more seats on that prison transfer bus and use cruel methods of punishment till our personalities adjust. I was publicly intoxicated, so the law gave me a very public persecution, so the media could portray me as the problem and the law as the solution. But what they don't broadcast is our prison living conditions, like a cave person pre-evolution. I fail to keep the peace because the law fails me every day. They tell me two wrongs don't make a right and crime doesn't pay, but I only become more institutionalized with every jail stay. I lose all my self-worth till I see no other way. My past prevents me from having a future, and that's supposed to be okay. I broke the law, so the law breaks me down. The law breaks me down. And all I have lost outweighs what little enlightenment I've found. Jail barely works for first-time offenders, so definitely never second, third time around. How can I learn from my mistakes when my head is chained and bound and my fate is left in the biased hands of a judge and a crown? How could I ever hear my calling in life when they've muted the sound? How could I stay afloat in society when I've been encouraged to drown? How could I smile in the face of hard times when I've spent so long in a frown? And how could I climb the ladder of success when it's planted on shaky ground? Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. That was fire. You're the best, and much respect to you, and for grounding us with that experience. Lindsay, if you could put the slides back up. So I'm going to hand it over to Val now, who will walk us through an overview of our project.
Thank you, Alex. And thanks so much, Vanessa. That was really, really amazing, really impactful. And thanks for sharing such a personal piece of writing and even just your presentation of it. You're a really talented spoken word artist. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so what is the Tracking and Justice Project? The Tracking and Justice Project is a law enforcement and criminal legal data and transparency project tracking police-involved deaths and deaths in custody across Canada. This project aims to provide access to data and analysis so individuals, organizations, and communities can collectively advocate, shape policy, and create accountability. So how do we define custody? We define custody as being held in a condition where your right to liberty is deprived by police during arrest or after being arrested, by corrections workers in a corrections facility, or in a care facility under a legal order due to mental health legislation. This can include police cars or police station holding cells, provincial and correctional centers for remanded and sentenced individuals of 2 years less a day, federal correction centers for a sentence of 2 or more years, prisoner transportation vehicles, court holding cells, immigration detention centers, youth detention centers, and psychiatric forensic facilities. So the launch of Deaths in Custody database provided the first publicly accessible online database across Canada since the year 2000. People can explore the data to search a number of different variables for each person that is in our database. You can explore the data to search the full name of the person who died in custody, the age of the person at the time of their death, the date of their death, the year, their gender, their race, the province or territory in which they died, the institution or police force at which the person was held in custody, any tactical interventions that were used, their manner of death. The data on the website is intentionally presented in an accessible way to encourage others to use it for their own analysis. Research and advocates can filter variables to focus on specific issues. For example, you can examine the relationship between gender and tactical interventions, or race and cause of death. All the data can also be downloaded into your own Excel spreadsheet, making it easy to use for research, advocacy, and driving social change. And just a note on the names, our website does make efforts to be trauma-informed as well. So if a person wants to explore the data and hide the names, that's also an option as well. Next slide, please. So this is the first thing you see when you go onto our website. It brings the data to life in many different ways. It includes a running tracker of both police-involved deaths and deaths in custody, as well as an interface, an interactive interface that lets users explore the data in more detail. The site also shares findings and analysis, as well as an in-memory page honoring those who have died, and also a blog section. The blog features powerful writing from people who are currently incarcerated, sharing their lived experiences and what they've witnessed. We also publish blogs on recent events and updates on the work that we're doing. Until more analysis is completed, we urge caution in interpreting these findings as a complete picture of deaths in custody across Canada. That said, because this is the largest data set of its kind ever created in Canada, and much of the information does come directly from government sources, we believe it offers a strong indication of potential trends that require deeper investigation. Next slide, please. So what does the database tell us? Currently, it includes 2,307 deaths in custody across Canada since the year 2000. Of course, as deaths continue across Canada, this is constantly being updated. And the information there's information being added to those deaths as well as more information becomes available. There's an average of 87 deaths per year in the database. Over the 10-year period from 2013 to 2023, the average number of deaths is 118 per year. Overall deaths in custody we have tracked seem to be on the rise. The average age of death is 44.5 years old. Due to a lack of consistent information on deaths in custody, our database is using a living methodology, which means that we continue to develop and grow over time as more data becomes available. So where did the data come from? The data was collected through multiple sources, including a filing of over 21 access to information requests in 2023 and 24, and 11 in 2025. We've analyzed coroner's documents, web scraping of government websites, media coverage and news articles, public government reports, word of mouth from communities, families, and people who are affected by these deaths, as well as social media platforms such as Facebook. So now that we've looked at where the data comes from and how it can be used, we'll turn to what some of the numbers actually tell us. The next section focuses on the findings and analysis from the deaths in custody database, including the most recent analysis from 2024. So to walk us through this in more detail, I will pass it over to Alex.
Thanks so much for that, Val. And I should underline Val's really great overview of things. This has been challenging work. It's really challenging to get accurate information on deaths in custody from government sources. So our team has been diligently digging for years to try and get accurate numbers. And we can't stress enough how challenging it is to get transparent information about deaths in custody from official government sources across Canada. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move forward. But so that's why we've had to go through so many different sources and so many different channels and file many different access to information requests, because this kind of information isn't accessible to the public, and we believe that it needs to be. So we're going to show you some charts now, just some graphs of kind of what is in our database in terms of deaths in custody. We're going to focus specifically on I'm going to focus a little bit on Ontario, then we'll kind of do a zoom out and focus on the rest of the country. But this chart here gives you a sense of the deaths in custody in Ontario in our database since the year 2000. One of the things to note is that because of access to information earlier on from the year 2000 to about 2007, 2008 or 9, we don't have very accurate information. So those numbers are a bit harder to come by. But post that, we're quite sure about the numbers. We get them directly from the coroner, chief coroner in Ontario, and so we're pretty solid about those numbers. So as of 2010, for example, we see a very sharp increase in the number of deaths in custody, which is quite alarming, and has increased by 205%. Which is very, very a thing to be concerned about, because during that time, the number of people who are incarcerated has actually decreased in the province. So we've seen an increase in deaths in custody while the number of people has slightly decreased or remained kind of the same, but just slightly lower. This dip that you would see as of the year 2001, which again, going back up to going up again in 2002, 2021 and 2022 at the end here, is generally because of, again, lack of kind of access to information. We don't have as much information for more recent deaths as we do to deaths prior to 2021. I will ask Lindsay to change the slide. So this is where we have really accurate information, um, and kind of just gives a zoom in to specifically looking at deaths in custody in Ontario jails from information from the Chief Coroner of Ontario. So this is looking specifically at, and one of the things you can do with our data is look at specific institutions, specific jurisdictions, and do an analysis on your own of specific locations. So this is specifically for or giving an indication specifically for Ontario jails where people are incarcerated less than 2 years. Lots of people in Ontario jails are incarcerated on remand, meaning pre-trial detention. So haven't yet to, for example, be found guilty or have found, not that that matters in the context of what we're talking about, but have yet to be prosecuted or yet to have had a trial. So they are essentially just awaiting a hearing or could be awaiting sentencing as well. This is an indication of deaths in custody increasing in Ontario jails over 2010 to 2024. I'll get you the change the slide. So one of the things we've tried to do is understand or make sense. So our database itself does just provide straightforward data, but one of the things we're increasingly trying to do is kind of make sense of this increase. Then we're seeing increases across the country, but we see one of the sharpest increase happening in Ontario. Why are we having so many deaths in custody in Ontario? Why is our deaths in custody increasing at such an alarming rate? Specifically when the prison population is slightly declining or remaining the same, or the jail population is remaining slightly the same or decreasing. We have started analyzing our data in relation to policy changes or policy inertia or things that have been happening in the social context. And this is something that our data allows us or enables us to do that previously we haven't been able to do. We haven't been able to answer basic questions about or even understand that deaths in custody were on the rise, or be able to compare across jurisdictions to understand why are deaths in custody happening more in this area than they are in another area in Canada. So we've been able to start doing that because we now have the data. And so we encourage other people to do the same thing, use the database to examine or answer your own questions. And so one of the questions we're interested in is why has there been this 205% increase in deaths in custody in Ontario jails? And so we started looking at policy frameworks to understand maybe that is a place where we can look at giving us some answers. And so over the past 15 years, during this kind of increase, there has been a range of policy decisions which will argue, have facilitated a context which allows for the deaths in custody to proliferate, to have increased. So one of the things, I'll just walk through a number of them, and Lindsay, if you want to jump in as well at any point, or anyone else wants to jump in at any point, please let us know. But one of the sources of information that we get are outcomes from inquest documents. Inquests themselves into deaths in custody used to be mandatory in Ontario. So anyone who died in an Ontario facility who was in custody, there would be a mandatory inquest into that person's death. It was required by law. Inquests themselves are not the same as a trial. They don't determine a responsible party who then faces criminal charges or anything like that. They examine the context of a death. They're a legal hearing, but they examine the context of a death, and then they just explain what happened, and they come up with recommendations. Recommendations are not binding in an inquest, and as you'll hear through the course of our presentation, many deaths are continuing because recommendations aren't being implemented to prevent future deaths. But the idea of an inquest is that recommendations will be made, those recommendations would be implemented, and they would prevent future deaths from similar circumstances from happening. So if you have more questions about inquests, let us know. But In 2011, mandatory inquests into all deaths in custody were stopped in Ontario. So there's no longer mandatory inquests into deaths in custody happening, except when the death is deemed not natural. And so a death that deemed is not natural would be a death due to an accident, due to homicide, due to overdose, which would be deemed an accident, or other things. And so one of the things we'll talk about is this classification of natural death, which is actually a highly politicized classification, which could result in obscuring deaths that occur due to conditions of confinement. But all that to say, deaths in custody into mandatory inquests into deaths in custody no longer occur if a death is deemed natural. And so that's one thing that we have highlighted as potentially leading to not enabling more deaths to occur, but just kind of lacking oversight or kind of accountability into deaths. At the same time, just before this massive increase occurred, there was this act that was going to be passed, the Transformation of Corrections Act, which would have allowed the Mandela rules in Ontario to be enforced, and a whole bunch of other enabling policies to support the human rights of people who are incarcerated in Ontario to be enacted. And that was never put into force by the Ford government. So that's never been kind of followed through on. At the same time, the Ford government in Ontario also eliminated the independent advisor on corrections reform, who was essentially providing oversight into Ontario jails. So one thing that I think some people don't know, but they should know, is that there's no oversight body for Ontario corrections, Ontario facilities, Ontario corrections facilities, and there's zero oversight. So there's no oversight body that was eliminated. So there's no person examining human rights conditions in Ontario jails and providing oversight or transparency or calling for reform in any specific way. There's no body that does that anymore. There was also community oversight boards for specific institutions that did exactly that as well. They would provide reports on a regular basis. They would examine human rights complaints or any other complaints, talk about the specific conditions at specific institutions, and look at providing community oversight of those institutions. Those boards were eliminated too. So any type of oversight was eliminated in Ontario facilities, which meant that people can die and there's no kind of accounting for that. So we have these kind of policy changes that have, we would say, resulted in limited oversight, which could allow for the increased deaths to occur with like lack of accountability. Also, you'll also probably all know that there is issues around what's been called bail reform being introduced, meaning allowing for more and more people to be incarcerated pre-trial. And I think in Ontario, we're at over 80% of people who are incarcerated provincially are incarcerated on remand, meaning that they were denied bail. And also, I guess for everyone else's kind of, which isn't on here, but for everyone else's, for the interest of people on this in this group, we're probably likely seeing the forced institutionalization of people labeled with mental health issues or who have substance use issues as a result of increasing turn towards involuntary treatment, which we're very concerned about will lead to an increase in deaths in custody due to the number of lack of supports we're seeing. There's also like a number of kind of productive, helpful things that have been enacted over this time, but none of them that have been really followed through on. So there was an Ontario expert advisory panel examining conditions of healthcare in Ontario jails, which did call for healthcare to be administered, healthcare in Ontario jails to be administered by the Ministry of Health as opposed to by the Ministry of the Solicitor General. That wasn't followed through on, and that is a big recommendation that we have overarching, and that you'll also see in many different inquest recommendations, is that the Ministry of Health should be administering healthcare in Ontario jails. Currently, healthcare is administered by the same institution that is punishing people, and as a result, healthcare is administered in a way in which it is enacted as a form of, it's withheld intentionally, it's people are neglected intentionally, and that allows for the proliferation of deaths to occur. So one of the main things we want to see is the administration of healthcare by the Ministry of Health, also looking at continuity of care when people get released and so on. There was a really, really excellent report that came out in 2022 by the Chief Coroner of Ontario talking about this increase in deaths in custody and what are some of the causes and concerns around that. And that really hasn't been addressed or followed up through by the provincial government. And there was also a inquest into the death of Solomon Fakiri, which our team it was engaged in, and Lindsay may be able to talk about it briefly, who was an expert witness during that inquest. And one of the recommendations that came out of that was that there should be an immediate institution of a civilian oversight body of Ontario provincial jails, which has never been followed through on. So those are some of our kind of the policy environment and policy context, which has led to which we believe has led to a kind of supportive environment for enabling an increase in deaths in custody. Next slide. I'm just looking at this question from Rhonda Thompson. Could you request a report to be conducted by the Auditor General in Ontario to report on the lack of oversight of Ontario jails? Yes, we could. We could. That's a good idea, and that's something we definitely could do. And we do have the Ombudsman in Ontario, but the Ombudsman has not been doing a huge amount of work on that, and they are more complaint oriented, and they kind of just determine, I know many people make complaints to them around deaths in custody, but they haven't been very proactive or supportive as well. Lindsay, am I doing this slide or you're doing this slide? I can't see the names on it.
You are.
Okay, cool. So we did do a bit of, we're going to give kind of some insight into some of the analysis that we've done, just to give a sense of people, of what you can see overall in our database. So moving away from Ontario and the specific increase, this is just some slides. We're going to give you a sense of who you will see in the database. And one of the things we'll caution is that this is an analysis we did last year, so it's not updated to the current moment. But you can see some slides on our website that, or some charts on our website that are updated in real time. And one of the things we'll also caution is our database is the largest database on deaths in custody that has ever been created in Canada. We rely specifically on government sources and media sources, as Val let us know, but we want to be very cautious that this is, we think this is quite an accurate picture of what's happening in terms of deaths in custody. We want to caution that more needs to be done. So this just gives us a picture of who is in the database, and you can then use your judgment to understand how this applies more generally to the issue of deaths in custody across Canada. So of the data we've collected since 2000, 69% of the people who've died in custody are men. And we don't know, you'll notice as we go through our data, there's a huge amount of unknowns of things that we don't know. And here we have worked with a group called Justice Trans, who are working on access to justice issues for trans people across Canada. And one of the things that we have been quite aware of is that official sources that we rely on don't always document how people lived in the world in the way they wanted to be understood. So we rely on sources that might not accurately describe someone's gender in relation to how they knew themselves, and we do our best to figure that out through looking at media articles and so forth. But this does not accurately capture, for example, trans people's experience due to gaps in understanding of that experience in official documents.
Can I just add one thing to that as well, is that we also just honor the person. So like we've had situations where maybe family does not honor how the person identifies, and so we honor how the person would like to be identified. And so there has been, it's not easy. It's not just a checklist of a demographic question, right? Like we've taken time to consult and to really talk through how we represent people in this database.
And maybe the next slide. So we, again, have a huge gap in understanding of race and ethnicity in our database. Because this information isn't collected in the documents we work on, in coroner's documents outlining the details of someone's death, that information just isn't there. There is in Corrections Service Canada, there's a checklist that people fill out, or that's filled out when people enter an institution around someone's race, but that information isn't correlated to when someone dies. So we do our best to try and find information on race, but we have, as you can see, over 80% of that information is unknown. So coroners have 5 categories that they define a death as being within. So one is suicide, homicide, natural, accidental, and undetermined. And so what we did here is just examined all of the ones where we knew the coroner's definition, and combined the ones that were deemed unnatural, so suicide, homicide, and accidental together. And we know that of the deaths where there is a coroner's determination, 54% of the deaths in our database between 2000 and 2024 are due to unnatural causes. Again, I will underline and we'll talk about one specific death later, where the category of natural should not be understood as what one would deem a natural cause of death in all circumstances. This is a category that is contested and something that we're trying to put into question through our work.
Alex, I can
Okay.
move with this one. So as Alex mentioned so a little earlier, that when figuring out a cause of death, we have these, we've put these all in categories. And so this breaks this down further than the manner of death that just covers the 5, like accidental, natural, undetermined. I can't remember the other ones right now, sorry. But we just
Natural, suicide, undetermined,
suicide. Yeah.
homicide, accident.
Sorry, guys, it gets all a blur after a while. But so we wanted to just break it down even further through our spreadsheets and through our database around how people are actually dying, because again, those 5 categories don't always give the full picture of what's happened. And so you guys can see, unfortunately, 12.7% of chronic condition, even just having a percentage, if I knew how to work PowerPoint, I would have put the number. That's just my own problem, because it's really important to know that there was hundreds of people that have died due to chronic condition or illness. The substance withdrawal is also something that should be highlighted, that I can tell you from our database, specifically in Ontario, that we have probably half of those substance withdrawal are happening within our local jails, Toronto South, Hamilton Jail, Maplehurst, and Windsor Jail. Also too, just another thing around the unknowns, as Alex was mentioning, that we have a lot of unknowns. It doesn't mean that we're never going to find out the information. It's just that as of this moment right now, there's not enough information out there publicly or that we haven't obtained yet that we can update our cases and the people in our database so that these numbers can change. Also too, that just, it kind of goes back to the government as well as like protecting this information, that they don't want us to have this information. And so sometimes we actually have to wait until inquests are happening to be able to gather more information so that we can update our numbers. This is just a quick graph because again, we know this is a national call, and so it's great to know across the board, across the country, where you kind of sit with the amount of deaths in custody that you're experiencing. And Alex did mention that Ontario is the highest. It's also, this number contributes to the fact that we have 25 provincial institutions, but we also have multiple, like we're the largest province that has the most federal prisons. And so that number represents both provincial, federal, and all of the other, like the immigration, which is held within our federal institutions and provincial. And so that's just really, that number there is replicating that Ontario has the most jails and prisons. Which again, you can also think about what's happening right now with Doug Ford talking about building more jails. And so if we're just going to keep building more jails that don't operate and we're not addressing these deaths in custody, then we're just building more death traps, really. And just really quickly, that we wanted to give you a glance across the country about which jurisdiction deaths are happening in the most. And so as you see here, we have in federal custody, we have 35%, which is a lot. And you also think about with federal custody, what comes with that is that people are in there longer, so they may be suffering from more chronic illness, like unaddressed chronic illness. You just have people, you have more people at the time. And so we just also have incarcerate federally, especially Indigenous women. We're seeing that an increase in Indigenous women being held in federal custody as well, and also dying. Police custody, sorry guys, it's been a long day, and it's only one. Police custody, we have 13%. Again, that doesn't really like sit. It doesn't paint the picture at how many hundreds and thousands of people are dying at the hands of police. It also just doesn't give you the narrative or the context that we have a huge amount of people that are just dying in the drunk tank, you know, and you don't get that from some of this data. And so that's some of the stuff that we've been able to do within the database, is how we code things and how we move through each death and pull out the information. We're able to put together more of a story about how people die instead of just looking at these numbers.
Can I jump in quickly for just 1 second? Okay, just around the drunk tank, because I think people will be interested to know this. It's important for people to know if we're talking about substance use health. One of the things we have been able to use our data to call for, and will be continuing to call for, is just like the elimination of drunk tanks altogether, because they end up resulting in so much death. Incarcerating people while they are intoxicated is just terrible, terrible policy that results in horrific circumstances. And Sandy isn't here today, but one of our awesome colleagues, Sandy Pitzel's son, died in a drunk tank in 2020 in the prairies, and was left face down in a concrete cell for 3 hours convulsing, or more than 3 hours convulsing, while not being supervised, just because they just disregarded his experience. And that's incredibly common. We've seen quite a number of drunk tank deaths that occur where people are put in spit hoods, which is a horrific instrument that results in people choking on their own vomit when they're in the drunk tank and then suffocating and dying. But it's a horrific, horrific policy decision to incarcerate people while they're intoxicated. So if we can mobilize people on this call to address the challenges of drunk tanks and kind of working to undo those, that would be a major thing. So just highlighting that.
Thanks. Also too, just really quickly, we do have we do keep track of tactical intervention use, and we've broken things down into these categories of chemical inflammatory agent, restraint equipment, which could be handcuffs. Sorry, chemical inflammatory agent could be like, is your like the pepper spray or the foam spray that they spray in your face, and then they put the spit hood on. I'm being very facetious as I'm moving through this. This makes me angry. The restraint equipment could be handcuffs. It could be leg irons. We have intermediary weapon, which is like the tasers. And then you have physical handling. We have firearms. We have a medical sedating agent, which would be some sort of injection shot. We have canine, and we have combination of tactical intervention. And more often than not, a lot of these tactical interventions are used at one time, which we see as at 24%. But I think the important piece is that these interventions are being used on people who are unwell, who are in acute distress, who are suffering from mental health, who may be extremely dope sick, and doesn't want to leave their cell. So they bring in a bunch of people to remove them from their cell. And so these tactical interventions are used as a way to control people's behaviors, but they're being controlled when people are experiencing healthcare crisis, or even if there's like a fight that broke out, and then they bring in the goon squad, which is like their SWAT team of the institutions, and then they just do all of this, right? Like they pepper spray you, they'll restrain you, they'll physically handle. It's not just one person physically handling you, it's a bunch of people physically handling you. And as the person who is being intervened on, if you're fighting for your life because you can't breathe and you're trying to say like, help me, or if you're not saying anything, that's like you're resisting. Like even you just trying to fight for your life, you're resisting their control. And so then they just pile on even more. And so that's kind of what Alex was talking about, like, but that our natural category, it's hard to see. We have a lot of cases where it was deemed natural, where it shouldn't have been deemed natural, because there was a bunch of tactical interventions and there was other things that contributed all at once to somebody dying and losing their life. Alex, did you want to say anything to that?
No, and we can give some examples in a minute. There are a number of questions in the chat maybe we could address, unless you had
I
another.
just can't see the chat.
Okay.
It's really difficult to share
Yeah.
screen, chat, slide. I get trigger happy with the slides.
Maybe I can go through the questions quickly just so we
Yeah,
can.
for sure.
Okay, so there's one question from
Can I stop share then?
yeah, you can stop share.
Okay, great.
From anonymous attendee, how does the rate of death in Canada compare to other countries, including the US? So that's a great question. It's something we have not done comparisons of yet. Our project is in progress, and we encourage other people to do that work as well. So if you're interested in that and you want to do that, it is quite challenging to do because we'd have to compare the populations that are incarcerated and figure out rates of incarceration versus rate of death. But it's not impossible. It's just something we haven't done yet. And it's something we are just at the place now to have our data in a solid position to start doing these kinds of things. So I like those kinds of questions, encourage other people to do this work too, but it's something we will be doing soon.
Can I also just add to that, like when we keep saying like this is a living database and like we're always working, because so like when Tracking and Justice started, they were doing a spreadsheet database on police involved deaths using excessive force, which there was about 800 people that had died. When we were doing deaths in custody, for somebody that's been doing this advocacy for a while around deaths in custody, I didn't even expect the amount of people that we had. Like to have 2,300 people in our database blows my mind. And we're not even finished with some of the information we have. Like we still have a full federal release package with 1,300 people that we don't know if they're new or if they're duplicates. And so, like it's great. There's so much information that we can do after we get this database done, but like it's been so overwhelming with just the amount of people that was unsuspect. Like we didn't suspect to have this many people.
Yes, yeah, we had more than double the amount of deaths once we started collecting the information that we anticipated having, which is a horrible thing to have discovered. From Ashley, we have, is there any recognition of transness and or non-binary outside of Two-Spirit? And yes, there is. Yeah, we do collect that information. We don't have any deaths that fit those categories, so they weren't represented in that chart that you saw. So we didn't have the categories that weren't represented. And one of the things we tried to address there is say that we think that there are, or we kind of know that there are some trans people in our database, definitely, but they're not represented in the official ways in which they're talked about. So we're going to be doing more work on that to figure out that. There's also lots of complications around that, around how do we remember people in a way that is honoring who they are? How do we not expose information that some people might not want to be out in the public realm? So there's lots of complexities around that, and that's why had been working with Justice Trans around. I'm working to identify trans people in the database in ways that are respectful and ways that accurately present the issue. But because we don't have any people who fit those categories yet, they don't show up in any of the charts that we're presenting to you. So there is a kind of careful consideration around that. And then Alyssa asked, do you have any papers highlighting specifically the deaths in drunk tanks? That's something they would love to circulate. We don't have any papers on that yet, and we will be working on that, probably working on a fact sheet or something like that. We do have some fact sheets on our website, and one specifically around the use of spit hoods, which I referenced, and also one specifically around deaths where force is used and the person is labeled as having schizophrenia. And so you can look those up, and we'll have more over the coming few years, thanks to our funding from the Law Foundation of Ontario. And then there's another question that's Rebecca will answer. So we can go back to the slides unless Rebecca wants to jump in with anything.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'll jump in with the poll now, and if everyone can just fill that out while we continue on. And yeah, we'll be posting the links to all the resources shared, plus the other articles that you mentioned, Alex, on our website, and we can also email it out to the people who registered. And I'll launch the poll and let you carry on. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you. So Lindsay, if you could put the slides back, we're gonna, I think, walk through a few cases.
Oh,
This is
just one more slide. Just wanted to highlight this because the very dramatic rise in information being not accessible to us. We thought it was really important to be able to show you that over time, which again kind of goes back to the slide that Alex was talking about the policy changes, especially in Ontario, that all of a sudden we have a new government, we have new policy changes, we have ignored bills that should have been set into force, and all of a sudden now no oversight, no community advisory boards, and all of the information that we could previously access has now been taken away from us. And so that just makes it harder for us to gather information. And also the freedom of information request is not an easy process. Like, we spend months sometimes going back and forth with these people about privacy. I need to learn the Privacy Act because they just feed you a bunch of privacy notes that, like, why they're not going to release information. But I feel that that's another way for them to keep the information private, because not many of us know the Privacy Act, can challenge that back and forth. And so it's really it's such a gruesome and exhausting process to try to get information from the government about people that have died in custody. And so, like, it just speaks to that our carceral systems, like, they're just disappearing people. And they're disappearing the people, but they're also disappearing all the information.
So we're going to walk through 3 cases just to give you a bit more of a context around some of these numbers that we're showing you. One of the things our project really likes to focus on is not just, I mean, we're conscious of the idea that we're creating numbers, but we want people to know that every number is a person who had an experience, who has family, who was loved, who was cared for, who had complex interaction within institutions that they were in. So I'm going to talk through 3 different cases, and I'm going to do it out of a different order, but we'll just talk through them quickly. I'll give you some specific context just to summarize these cases. So we can give people a little bit more context around them. And the first one I'm going to look at is the case of KHA, who was incarcerated at Oak Ridge, the Oak Ridge division of the Penetanguishene Mental Health Center, which is now known as Waypoint Center for Mental Health, which is connected. It's a maximum security psychiatric facility connected to the institution there. And so this person was incarcerated in 2005 and found not criminally responsible due to mental health issues in relation to a series of criminal charges. The Ontario Review Board ordered that person to be held at the institution they were held at, and they ended up in a structured intervention unit, which is essentially kind of like administrative segregation, which is another word for solitary confinement, along with some other so-called supports that were there. During his incarceration, he was diagnosed with a series of mental health issues, and he was prescribed a range of sedatives and also antipsychotic medications. 4 years later, he was at the institution, and he was brought out of his structured intervention unit for a period of time, at which time he got into a conflict with one of the corrections officers who was in the space with him. During that conflict, he was put into a 3-person restraint hold known as a chin lift. So that's where one person puts their forearm around the person's neck and 2 people hold you down on either side of your body. So 3 people are holding you down, 1 person with their arm around your neck. He was moved by those 3 people from the ground to the wall, and then he was injected with a sedative, which I can never pronounce the word for, but it's zuclopenziferol. I don't have a background in medicine, so, but he was injected with that into his hip, and his body went limp. The staff put him down on a mattress, and 5 minutes later, he had no vital signs. He was pronounced dead and transferred to a hospital. The cause of his death was determined to be sudden cardiac death due to toxicity from the drug that he was administered. It often takes quite a number of years for an inquest to take place, and if one is required, and this one was held in 2014, and his death occurred before mandatory inquests were occurred for all were ending for all or ended for all deaths in custody in the province. So this was before that. So the inquest was held in 2014, and the manner of his death was determined as natural. So the way in which this person died on official documentations is determined as a natural death. There was 46 recommendations made, one which has banned the use of the chin lift hold, and another which has, one which banned the chin lift hold, and one which kind of had more caution around the use of this injection as a sedative. In our tracking of deaths, we have encountered similar deaths since that time and are unsure whether any of the recommendations have been implemented. If this person died recently in the similar circumstances and the death was deemed natural, there would be no inquest into this person's death. So because of the time frame, there was an inquest. So this gives you some insight into how some deaths can be deemed natural when they under objective examination are not due to natural causes. This person would not have died had there not been physical interaction from the corrections officers, and they were strangled and administered with a sedative. So that's one death we wanted to acknowledge. And again, acknowledging that this stuff is hard to hear and hard to talk about, but these are kind of the horrific conditions in which people die in across Canada on a semi-regular basis. And I'm presenting these three deaths because they are not abnormal in our database. They're not exceptions. They are ones we have seen that kind of follow patterns. The second death I wanted to talk about is the death of SS from Ottawa Carleton Detention Center, and that is the institution that Vanessa identified at the beginning with her powerful poem. And so this is the institution close to where I live, and it's a provincially run institution. And this death of SS is someone who died when she was 34 years old. And she died in 2016. And she was an Indigenous woman who had lived on the streets for many years. I think her experience is probably similar to some experiences of people who many of you likely work with. She had been an injection drug user for many years, and she underwent open heart surgery to replace a valve in her heart on July 7th in 2016. This was due to her history of substance use injection. She was discharged from the hospital about 8 days later. And then 4 days later, after she was discharged from the hospital, after having open heart surgery, she was arrested on the street for having an outstanding warrant. She was brought to a judge. The judge said, send her to the hospital. She went to the hospital. The hospital released her, and then she was taken. She had chest pains. The hospital released her, said she was kind of okay to go potentially. And she was then taken by police to Ottawa Carleton Detention Center. None of her hospital files were transferred around her surgery, her recent visit to the hospital. So there was no information about her history, her open heart surgery, or anything that were transferred to the jail. She was just there for some outstanding warrants. While being at the jail, she was in very poor condition health-wise, complaining of chest pains and asking for methadone. Nothing was given to her, and the corrections officer on duty there was tasked with taking her to the hospital again. He publicly complained that he wanted to go to his cottage on the weekend, and taking her to the hospital would take too much time, and so he didn't want to do it. So what he did is he drove her to the hospital in his transportation vehicle. He left her in the vehicle, went inside and got her hospital records, and then came back and drove her back to the institution so that he could go away on the vacation or go away on to his cottage. He brought her back to the institution. They gave her Tylenol. He then made her walk up a flight of stairs and then left her in her cell. She was then deemed unresponsive and ended up dying. And the death was later declared as cardiac complications of chronic intravenous drug abuse and cocaine toxicity. During the 5 days that she was released from hospital, she may have ingested some cocaine, but that was like a week prior to this incident. But the fact that there was a small trace amount of cocaine in her body, the coroner deemed that in relation to her to be related to a cause of her death. There were 37 recommendations made in her inquest, which was in 2023, and the death was deemed a homicide, where the corrections officer should have taken her to the hospital and that she would have survived. To date, we don't know that any of the recommendations have been instituted, and the corrections officer who refused to bring her to the hospital because he wanted to go to the cottage for the weekend still works at Ontario or Ottawa Carleton Detention Center. He still works there. And so that is another one of the deaths that we've been working on, and our team participated in that inquest. The last death I will just give a little bit less information on, but is the first one of the death of JS from Central East Correctional Center. And I just need to open. This is a young man who died in 2020 at 26 years old. And Lindsay may have a bit more information about this death, but I'll just give you a little bit of information. But he died at Central East Correctional Center at the provincial jail in Lindsay, Ontario. He essentially was incarcerated, and during his incarceration, required naloxone to be administered. And the people on who were in charge of supervising him left him in a room and did not administer the naloxone. And there's actually many instances where we hear of deaths occurring where people require naloxone to be administered and it's not being administered. The corrections officers are concerned about liability, that they're going to be sued. They're concerned about lots of other things, about safety, security, but they're not actually concerned about the health of the person and whether they're going to prevent the person's death. And this, again, is an issue around making sure that healthcare is administered by people who administer healthcare, as opposed to people who are tasked with punishing the individual. But all three of these deaths were preventable deaths that could have not occurred had the person been cared for. And often what we see, so similar to the death of SS from OCDC, we often see the documents that are produced as a result of that person's death blaming the person's substance use or blaming the person's mental health issues for that person's death, not the context surrounding it, not the actions of the people in charge of the administration of punishment. So for example, SS in official coroner's documents is labeled as a drug abuser over and over and over again, and with limited information about actually what happens. I'll pass it over to Lindsay, and again, acknowledging some of those stories are really hard to hear, so take time for yourself after this, and also happy to answer any clarifying questions about them. But I'll pass it over to Lindsay to talk about some current context now.
Sorry, my finger just hit something and it moved. I didn't mean to interrupt you with my fingers.
No, good. I'm happy to move on. Yeah.
So just before we close out, so that we can give you, I'll just go through this really quickly. Anne, I see your hand. Just give me 2 minutes. I'll just zip through this because I think it's important just to kind of know, like, as we're going to close this out, we're going to ground us in where we're at right now in 2025. And so since January of 2025, we've collected a minimum of 44 deaths in federal custody. We have collected as many provincial custody data that we could, but we've had a lot of pushback from other provinces to get updated numbers. But what we do know specifically in Ontario is that there's been 25 deaths to date in provincial custody in Ontario. We also know that there's been 12 deaths in police custody with the RCMP, Ontario, the OPP, Halifax Regional, and the Sûreté de Quebec. We also know that the age of death this year, the average age of death is about 57 years old, with the oldest person being 92 and the youngest person being 25 at their time of death. I also just want to flag that we're also getting a lot of young natural deaths, so people at 25, people at 28, people at 23 who are dying, and they're being classified as natural, which again should really concern us. And just something specific for this space, in Ontario, since 2024, they've held 3 super inquests. So the super inquest just basically grouped a bunch of people that have died over the same due to the same cause, and then did one big massive inquest. And so there was 3 super inquests: one for Hamilton Wentworth Detention Center, Niagara Detention Center, and just recently at Maplehurst Correctional Complex. And all of these inquests had to do with overdose deaths. And so together the inquest reviewed over 25 deaths that occurred between 2017 and 2021. And the recommendations, again, repeated recommendations, but these inquests show repeated failure in the health and access to healthcare, drug screening. A big issue we're seeing is emergency response inside provincial jails. I can give you an example. Hamilton Wentworth Detention Center, they have Maplehurst, they have about 1,500 people inside, and during 2017 and 2021, they had 1 staff working an overnight shift and looking after 6 units. And so if somebody went into medical distress in the far unit and he's in another unit, he has to get all the way to the other unit to respond to that medical crisis, or he wouldn't even know that it's happening. And so what we're seeing in Ontario is that we have a huge problem with staff shortaging, and that I believe that does directly reflect into why we're seeing so many deaths as well, is because there's not enough staff to even keep the institution safe, to keep people alive. And also another thing, the report from the chief coroner, it did outline that non-compliance by correctional staff is a really big problem, that we had 92% of the cases that we looked at with the chief coroner where non-compliance by correctional staff did come into the context of the death. Conclusion, I know it's a lot, guys, sorry. We can probably most likely say that deaths in custody are on the rise by our data. We do provide some analysis, but again, with our database, we encourage people to go and you can get your own analysis by downloading Excel spreadsheets and putting in all the variables. Please just keep checking our websites, our website for our blogs and for any updated information, but also what's really important is that you go check out our website to look at the memorial. And memorializing, which you guys all know, is super important. This is a beautiful demonstration by a bunch of families outside of London jail. And this memorial, all these memorial crosses were provincially removed by Sylvia Jones when she was the Solicitor General, because the guards filed a complaint with their union. Their union is OPSU. And they said that this memorial is traumatizing guards that are coming to work, and that it is ruining their ability to do their job. And so Sylvia Jones ordered the removal, and all of these crosses were thrown in the trash. Sean Spalding's sister, Sean Spalding died in Maplehurst. She went and she put up a cross out front of Maplehurst, and she watched a guard go pick it up and throw it in the trash. And so the work that we're doing is not just about the database, it's also about honoring the truth about how people have died inside, but also supporting the families and having to go through what they have to experience afterwards. Like, they're not just disappearing the people, but they're also working to disappear the families who are trying to find the truth and justice in what happened to their loved one. And I think that this is really harmful, that we can't even memorialize, we can't even honor people who have died because they're just going to go and throw our stuff in the trash.
Thanks for that, Lindsay. There are a few questions, and his hand's up. Maybe we can address the 3 questions in the chat, and then we can get to Anne. Or there's one that we answered already from Melissa, and then from an anonymous attendee, is the province of Ontario planning implementing involuntary treatment in prisons and jails? Any plans to track deaths regarding this? Any knowledge of this happening in other carceral settings? So yeah, that involuntary treatment fits the category of what we define as custody. So we will be tracking those deaths, and we are unfortunately anticipating high number of deaths in the context of involuntary treatment due to the combined and intersecting context of mental health, substance use, lack of oversight, and terrible conditions of confinement, which are resulting in such a high number of deaths already.
There's also rumors that Windsor Jail, Southwest Detention Center, is going to be a pilot project for forced treatment. And so I haven't personally been able to dig up any information, but has been a rumor. So if people can just flag that to your brain.
And Sarah Auger asks, are inquests related to drug toxicity deaths available online? And yes, they are in certain contexts, depending on where you're looking. There's a great website run by a coroner called inquests.ca, where you can look at a lot of inquest outcome documents. Also, some provinces on their chief coroner website will have inquest outcome documents available online. Otherwise, you can access them on through access to information requests. You can also email us directly and ask us for the documents. We probably have lots of things that we'd be able to share with you. And increasingly, we'll be making more available on our website, more documents around our sources, so people have them. But maybe
Also, though, it's not fun, but something that I do watch inquests on the regular. Like I'm currently help supporting a family right now in a Zach Rogers inquest. Um, so it's not fun to watch, but you can also watch inquests publicly where it's just a Zoom link, and not a Zoom link, it's an online stream, and it gives you a lot of information about things that you should know within the system, but also you learn how effed up the system is.
maybe we could hand it over to Anne for question. I don't know how to, oh, there we go.
I think I let her.
Great, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. I just wanted to alert people I go to inquests, and I went to a woman's inquest, and she really died in the municipal cells in Surrey, RCMP. But what they did is they Frankensteined her. This is a term I've made up. They kept working on her until they could get a pulse back. They kept her in the hospital for 4 days, and there was no inquest, and it's not a death in custody. And it's brutal. The amount of money that they spend keeping a sort of dead body alive. They did let the family come. I don't know if they donated organs, but it was just gruesome. And because she got picked up on a Friday, they kept her at the jail, the municipal RCMP, holding cells, because they wouldn't take her to Alouette, where this kind of thing I don't think would have happened. Anyway, I'm just saying, be on the lookout for things that are deaths in custody that are being painted as a death in a hospital, because they can, I don't know what else to call it. She really was dead when they found her, and they, managed to get a pulse back and then keep her on life support for from Sunday until Thursday. And then they pulled the plug with the family there. Anyway, I was pissed off because they picked her up and she had said that she had swallowed fentanyl. And when I said to the lawyer who was supposed to be acting on behalf of the families, who swallows fentanyl? Like, I've been at this a long time. And what I think she had done was swallowed it in plastic so that she would be able to use it later. And they took her to the hospital and gave her an anti-vomiting medication, and which is nuts, because now she's got fentanyl in her stomach. And whether she vomited it up and used it, or it just ate away at the plastic, and that's what killed her in the cell. But it was a really odd thing that no one seemed to understand, that like, she didn't make a fuss or anything. She had spent most of her life in jail. She was from Prince George. I believe her last name was Kelly. I can try and send that coroner's thing, but it's weird when you're in the audience because you can't raise this issue. I feel like jumping up and telling the coroner, like there's a judge up there. As you all know, they're sort of toothless things, but they can be a place for the community to come and watch an inquest and have some analysis, and they make recommendations, which I've never heard of being followed. Just saying. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Anne. And one of the things we do, which means our numbers are slightly different often than like official state numbers around this, is we do examine deaths that occur in hospitals, but were like originated in a custodial setting.
Good
So
for you guys.
we do track if someone's transferred to hospital and if the death occurs in hospital, because we're concerned about that issue. Yeah, thank you so much for raising it. It is a way in which there's a smokescreen to deny accountability if they say the death occurred in a hospital. conscious of time, so thanks for that. And I just want people to know that a lot of this stuff is disheartening and hard to hear, but one of the things we want to do is make all of this stuff visible so that we can act to change things. So view this a site and this work as an opportunity to engage in this issue, call attention to it, use the data for your own purposes, look up your community, look up the jails and prisons in your community, see how many deaths have occurred there, under what circumstances, and use that information in your own work to help affect change. And thank you so much for having us today.
Alex, Val, Lindsay, Vanessa, this has left, but this has been just so powerful. And it's like, it was interesting because before we started, I think it was you, Lindsay, said like, ooh, this is heavy today. And I was like, that's okay. Like, we can handle the heavy. Because it's also super inspiring to know that this work is being done, that this data is being collected, that this stuff is being documented, and the fact that you do have this open data database for us all to use is so powerful. And I'd love to talk more about that. I am really excited that you're game to come back. We want you back. So let's connect and follow up. And then also I'd like to invite everyone. We do have this Thursday drop-in meeting for members of the Substance Use Health Network. And that is facilitated by Reclaim Collective. And I'll put in a bug, and there are already a number of them are on this call, and I'm sure they'll also agree that this would be a great thing for us to follow up with as a network in that meeting to see what actions that we can take. Yeah. Big thanks. Also, just wanted to say, if anybody does want to debrief, because this has been really heavy, let me know. I'm happy to stay on with people or talk with people otherwise. And really big thanks and gratitude for all the work that your team is doing. And thanks to everybody who came out this afternoon to listen and learn about this. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us. It was really great being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Much respect to everybody.